Good day, grade 12 learners. With 20 or 21 days to go before your final exam, I assume that you are fairly ready to get your teeth into this paper. Welcome to English First Additional Language. Today we're going to be providing you with assistance on drama. Of the two dramas in your final paper, needless to say, you will have to answer questions based on the drama that you've studied at school. Now that could either be Nothing But the Truth or Romeo and Juliet. For today's lesson, we are going to be concentrating on Romeo and Juliet. Before we actually get into it, just a brief synopsis on the play. On the play Romeo and Juliet. You should have a thorough understanding of this play by now. You should have read this text at least twice. And you should have had many discussions with your teachers and your friends on the play by now. At this point, you should be purely revising, and you should be making every attempt to clear up any misconceptions, misunderstandings that you may have regarding the play. Let's just briefly have a synopsis of this play. Romeo and Juliet, young lovers who belong to two different households. Why am I telling you this? Because these two households, the Montagues and the Capulets, are feuding. A word that is often used in the text. Simple meaning of the word feuding, they are at, in nowadays time we would say they're at war. They're not getting along. They're fighting, basically. The thing about this feud is that it's mentioned in the text, but there is no reason mentioned for this feud. All they say to us is that it's an ancient grudge, meaning it goes back years. These two families have been at war with each other for years. And as luck would have it, or as fate would have it, their children fall in love. And, practically speaking, if two people fall in love, they want to be together. But if their families are feuding, how on earth are they going to be together if their families don't agree? And that is what essentially the story is about. The sacrifices they make to be together, and the reactions of their families, and eventually what they have to give up in order for them to eventually be together. The play starts with the servants. Now imagine the extent of this feud. If the Capulets and Montagues are warring, and if they are fighting or they are having a feud, and the animosity, that is the hatred and the anger between them, filters right down to the servants. It's like saying your parents are having an argument with another family member, and it goes so far as to where the children don't even speak to each other. So that's how bad it is. But at the beginning of the book, the servants of the Montagues and the Capulets households are having a brawl, a fight on the streets. Right? And they are disturbing the peace. And I'm doing this because I'm borrowing those words from the text. That is how it is mentioned in the text, that they are disturbing the peace. Eventually, the prince comes along. The prince is kind of like how nowadays we have the police. His job is to ensure that there is law and order in Verona. He comes along and in his voice, in his words, in his reaction to this brawling, he says, I'm sick and tired. Well, not in these words, obviously in Shakespearean language. I'm sick and tired of this. If this fighting goes on, he's actually reached a point where he's had enough. He's fed up, basically. And even the people, the citizens of Verona, they've had enough of this constant fighting between these two families. And he passes a decree, D-E-C-R-E, right? He passes a decree, and it's very important. It's essential that you remember what this decree is. He says, if either Montague or Capulet, any one of these households, disturbs the peace of Verona again, they will have to pay with their life. They will forfeit their life. They'll have to give up their life. So they're going to be put to death. Now, you could do that at that time. Obviously, in nowadays time, in modern times, you can't just say, well, you'll be put to death for fighting. It just doesn't work that way. But in those days, and I'm quite certain that these people are so fed up with this aimless fighting that the prince has finally taken a stand and he says, listen, this is the decree I am passing. If either one, Capulet or Montague, disturb the peace of Verona again, then you shall pay the forfeit of the peace with your life. That means that you will have to pay with your life. It's important that you remember that. Very, very important. In the next scene, we are introduced to Romeo. Romeo is in a state of melancholy. Something is troubling him. He is brooding. He wants to be in the dark all the time. His parents are very considerate and loving and attentive to him. And Lord Montague has noticed that his son is different. He's just not the same. And then he speaks to Benvolio to try and find out what is going on with Romeo. And Benvolio offers to speak to Romeo. And it emerges from his conversation with Romeo that Romeo is in love with Rosaline. But it is unrequited love. If you can't remember this, it would be good to remember this word in the exam. But if you can't, you just need to remember, in essence, basically what it means is that he loves her and she does not love him back. That's basically what it means. So it sent him into a state of melancholy. And Benvolio tries to speak to him and tries to get him into a better mood. Unfortunately, he's not very successful. And through it all, they come across a servant from the Capulet's mansion, from the Capulet's household. He has got with him a list. But prior to that, when the prince had passed the decree earlier on, remember in Act 1, Scene 1, Lord Capulet had met with Paris. Paris is the man who wants to marry Juliet. Now, you should know all this, and that's the reason why I'm skimming over it, because what I'm doing now is simply jogging your memory, bringing your memory back into the story. Paris wants to marry Juliet. Remember now what I'm going to say to you about Capulet's reaction to that. Capulet is Juliet's father. He says to Paris, you know, Juliet is still young. I can't simply give you permission to marry her. Juliet must want to marry her. I want you to remember this very clearly, because later on in the play, when she defies her father, he changes. He moves from ordering her, demanding that she marries Paris, and he is infuriated when she is disobedient to him, when she does not want to marry Paris. Obviously for reasons that you and I know why she doesn't want to marry Paris. Eventually, his tone now is that Paris needs to woo her, Juliet must agree, and then only will he give his consent. He also mentions that Juliet is young. Note later how all this flies out the window. He says to Paris, listen, I'm having a feast, like a party, this afternoon, and you must come. And there you can see Juliet, and she can see you, and then we can take it from there. And Paris agrees, because obviously now he wants to have Juliet's hand in marriage. For this actual feast, they send out a list with the names of all the people who should be invited. Unfortunately, the person who has the list, the servant from the Capulet household, is illiterate. He cannot read. Problem? That means he can't decipher, he can't figure out whose names are on the list. So what happens is that he needs to find somebody to help him. As luck would have it, he sees Romeo and Benvolio. He asks them to help him read the list. And they oblige, they agree to help him read the list. And the first thing that Romeo sees is that Rosaline's name is on that list. And based on that, he decides that he too is going to be attending this feast. Remember, Romeo is a Montague. He's got no business at any function held by a Capulet. But he decides to go because Rosaline's name is there. And Benvolio wants him to go because Benvolio wants him to see that Rosaline is just another woman in Verona. There are far more beautiful people, far more beautiful women that he feels Romeo should be exposed to, so that will help him now get over Rosaline. Nonetheless, they take the decision to go to the feast. Thereafter, Capulet mentions to Lady Capulet that Paris is interested in Juliet, and he would like to marry her. Lady Capulet mentions this very casually, not pushing her, not goading her in any way, but very casually to Juliet. And Juliet, I want you to notice the type of girl she is at this point in the play. Says, you know, she hasn't thought of marriage, but she wouldn't mind looking at Paris. She wouldn't mind, well, you know, having a look. She might just take a liking to him. So notice how obedient she is at this part of the play. I also want you to notice Lord Capulet and Lady Capulet's reactions to Juliet, how they treat her, how they interact with her, because later on that's going to change. Nonetheless, the night of the feast comes along. Romeo, his friends Benvolio and Mercutio gate crash the party. Now, because it's a party where they needed to kind of dress up, they get away with it because they wear masks. They get to the party and he sees Juliet from a distance, and instantly he falls in love with her, to a point where he goes up and he basically speaks. And in his speaking, his voice is overheard by Tybalt. Now, Tybalt is Juliet's cousin, a very fiery young man, filled with passion, also very violent, always spoiling for a fight. When I say spoiling for a fight, I mean looking for a fight, not one to shy away from something. Very aggressive, somebody who will quickly raise his sword or stand up for a fight. He hears the voice of Romeo, and by that he says this, by his voice should be a Montague. And he wants to fight, because obviously now, you know, Romeo has got no business being at this party. And he's drawn his sword, and luckily Capulet sees him. And Capulet, at the back of his mind, is remembering the decree. Remember the decree I spoke about? The decree passed by the prince, which was that if either Montague or Capulet disturbs the peace of Verona again, they shall pay the forfeit of the peace with their life, meaning they'll be put to death. And he tries to calm Tybalt down. He also says to Tybalt, listen, Romeo's got a good reputation. There's nothing bad being said about him in Verona, and he's not doing anything wrong at this party, so let's just rather leave it. Now, I'm not sure, or this you need to make up your own mind on, whether he takes the stance of kind of preventing a fight because of the decree, or whether indeed he does believe Romeo's a good person. And if the fact that he's a good person it's not a problem that he's at this party. So you need to make up your mind on that. But there's two ways of looking at it, all right? Nonetheless, Tybalt is forced to put away his sword and the party goes on. And Romeo meets Juliet for the first time and she allows him to kiss her. Very important. You need to remember that she allows him to kiss her, and in a haste, they need to depart because the party's come to an end and they need to depart. And her mom calls her, so she needs to go in. And when Romeo tries to find out who Juliet is, and Juliet tries to find out who Romeo is, it is said to her that he is a Montague, the son of your enemy, which is a Montague. And at that point, the fact that she has fallen so passionately in love with him is evident in her words when she says, if he really is a Montague, then, and if I can't be with him, then my grave will be my marriage bed. In other words, I will rather die than not be with him. Quite passionate, quite extreme, if you ask me. But consider also the circumstances, and consider also that she's probably falling in love for the first time. Romeo eventually leaves but doesn't go away. He hides in the garden of the Capulet's household. And remember, he's a Montague. This in itself is something that could bring him death. It's extremely dangerous. As he's in the garden, he sees Juliet coming out onto her balcony. And this is the famous balcony scene that you will hear people mention very often, and where she speaks out aloud about the love that she feels for him. And she says, oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? You'll hear this very often. Basically what it means is not where are you, wherefore art thou. It simply means, why do you have to be Romeo? And she says to him, if you deny your father and refuse thy name, be but sworn, my love, and I shall no longer be a Capulet. If you move away from your family and if you refuse thy name and all of that, she will marry him. I shall no longer be a Capulet. When does a lady stop being the person that she is? Well, not really the person that she is. Stop having the name that she has. When she marries, because then she needs to take her husband's name. So indirectly, she's kind of saying that she's giving herself to him. He hears this, and he speaks out aloud, and she hears him, and she's shocked that there's somebody listening to her. Eventually, they get together, and there are some words of love exchanged, and she tells him that if you really are serious, then we need to make some sort of arrangements for us to be together. And in the sadness, the nurse comes in, and the nurse calls her in, and she has to leave him again. And in this time, he doesn't go home. His heart's so that he has to leave her. He doesn't go home. He goes to Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is like a priest. All right, he goes to Friar Lawrence. It's early in the morning. Remember, they're just coming out of the feast the night before. It's very early in the morning. Friar Lawrence is out in the garden, and he's picking herbs. And he says to Friar Lawrence that he's fallen in love with somebody. And Friar Lawrence assumes that it's Rosaline. Now, the fact that Friar Lawrence assumes that it's Rosaline means that Romeo has been confiding in him previously. But then Romeo says, no, it's not Rosaline, it's Juliet. It's Capulet's daughter, Juliet, and I wish to marry her. Now, Friar Lawrence is a man of God. He's also, kind of like an elderly man, quite mature, able to make decisions. He opts to marry, to be part of this marriage between Romeo and Juliet, and he opts to marry them. And the next day, the nurse goes to Romeo, and Romeo tells her that Juliet must come to Schrift. The word Schrift means confession. When you go to church and you have confession, the nurse tells her she must go to confession, and there she and Romeo will be married. So the next day, she goes to confession, and Romeo and Juliet are married. And eventually, well, they have to split ways again. But on his way home, on Romeo's way, I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. On Romeo's way home, he meets Tybalt. Remember, go back to the feast scene where Tybalt was deprived of the opportunity to fight Romeo for being in the Capulet house. And he is still angry with that. Remember, I said to you, he's fiery and he's aggressive and he's a violent man. And he's still angry about that. And he is talking to Benvolio and Mercutio, and he wants to know, where's Romeo? So they speak to him casually, Mercutio starts to get irritated. He starts to get annoyed at Tybalt's insistence on wanting to know where Romeo is. And Romeo eventually arrives. And Tybalt says to him, listen, I have my men. I don't want to speak to you anymore. The business is between Romeo and I. And he starts to goad Romeo. He starts to push Romeo. And he starts to try to basically pick a fight with him. And Romeo, knowing that he's married to Juliet, and that makes Tybalt his cousin now, is trying to avoid a fight. Mercutio, through this whole thing, is getting even more annoyed and draws his sword. And he and Tybalt begin to fight. In an effort to stop the fight, Romeo gets between them. In an effort to stop the fight, he gets between them, and by holding them down or holding Mercutio down, Tybalt gets a chance to wound Mercutio. But unfortunately, it's not just a wound. It's not just an injury. It is something that will kill Mercutio. Tybalt injures him, and then he runs away. And Benvolio takes Mercutio into the house, and he comes back a few moments later to say that Mercutio has died. And this troubles Romeo. He says his love for Juliet has made him too soft, too weak. And whilst he's thinking about these things, Tybalt approaches. He comes back. And in this anger, in this fury, in this despair, in his sadness that Mercutio has died because of him, Tybalt and Romeo fight, and Romeo kills him. When Romeo kills him, Romeo runs away. He fights him, and then he kills him, and then he runs away. And the prince arrives. Again, the streets of Verona have been, the peace of the streets of Verona has been disturbed. And remember the decree, if anyone should disturb the peace of Verona, they will pay for it with their lives. With that, the prince wants to know, what happened here? Why is there bloodshed? And Benvolio explains to him, and he realizes that, Tybalt started the whole thing, and Mercutio is dead, and now Tybalt is dead. So the prince says, Romeo is henceforth, that means from now onwards, banished from Verona. He can never come back to Verona. If he's found in Verona, he'll be put to death. And the news goes back to Romeo, who is now gone to Friar Lawrence's cell to seek some sort of solace or to find some comfort. And at that point, he is distraught. He is broken. He's beside himself for many reasons. The nurse comes along because now Juliet has found out what has happened. And Juliet has sent the nurse to Romeo with a token to tell him that it is actually from her. This message is from her, and he must come to say goodbye. And Romeo eventually goes to Juliet to say goodbye, and he realizes that she still loves him, even though he's murdered her cousin. And Romeo is banished to Mantau. He has to run away to Mantau. Friar Lawrence tells him, go to Mantau, spend some time there, wait for this whole thing to die down, so to speak. And in that time, as the time passes, you can come and make peace, and you can come and reclaim Juliet. And he listens, and he goes away to Mantau. In this whole time, Juliet, Lord and Lady Capulet now are starting to put pressure on Juliet to get married, which, if you think about, they found out about Tybalt's death, and they feel that she's crying so excessively because of Tybalt. They don't realize that there's two reasons. Yes, it is because of Tybalt, but it's also because she will never see Romeo again. They start to put pressure on her to marry Paris. And she refuses, for obvious reasons. She's already married to Romeo, but she can't tell them that. And this is where their conditional love comes across. They will love her if she does as they want her to do. But the minute she goes against them, Lord Capulet is at a point of saying, listen, I will disown you if you do not marry Paris. And she starts to feel desperate because she feels there's nowhere else to turn. She goes to Friar Lawrence, and she says to him that they need to make a plan. He gives her a potion that will make her appear dead, which she takes that night. And remember, this from a young, naive girl at the beginning of the play to someone who's got all this, who's got the strength and the courage to take such a potion. She takes the potion, and it renders her dead. I'm doing this because she's not really dead. The nurse comes to get her up the next morning. Oh, and she puts a dagger underneath her bed in case the potion doesn't work. The nurse comes to get her the next morning. She doesn't get up. News goes to Romeo that Juliet has passed away. He becomes eccentric. He is, as I said, he's distraught. His love has passed away. He goes to an apothecary, a chemist. He gets some poison, and he goes to the tomb. He goes to the tomb. He finds Paris, who is mourning over Juliet. He's taken her flowers. He fights Paris, and he kills Paris. He drinks the poison in the tomb, and then he dies. And just as the life is leaving him, the life re-enters Juliet. That means she's starting to get up, right? And Friar Lawrence is on his way there. She gets up, and she sees that it is Romeo and Romeo has died. And Friar Lawrence tries to explain to her that the letter that he sent couldn't get to Montau because the friars were delayed, and eventually he tells her, it's fine, I'll put you into a sisterhood of nuns and you will never be known and you can live your life. And she doesn't want to. She just doesn't want to. So he leaves her in the tomb. He leaves her with Romeo's dead body. And she tries to take a drop of poison off his lips, and she doesn't get it right. She doesn't die. So she takes a dagger and she kills herself, and her body falls over him. And eventually the two of them die. And with that, Friar Lawrence, the prince is called, Lord and Lady Lord Montague and Lord Capulet come along, and Friar Lawrence is caught trying to leave the tomb, and all the explanations come about. And they realize that these two have sacrificed their love, have sacrificed their lives because they were in love, and there was no way that they could truly be together. And so these parents, the Lord and Lady, Lord Montague and Lord Capulet, eventually pay the highest price for this feud. They lose their children because of this unexplained hatred between them, really. And I say this because it says an ancient grudge that's not explained in the book. It's just a grudge that has been come through from generation to generation and eventually they pay the ultimate price. They sacrifice their children, or their children sacrifice themselves for each other. And in that, they realize the error of their ways, and they decide to come together. And they decide to erect gold statues of both Romeo and Juliet in the city of Verona. And they promise to put an end to this feud and eventually find some peace. But I just feel that something like that, putting the end to the feud now comes a little bit too late after the loss of two lives and so much of pain that they will have had to go through. And that basically is the story, which you should have known by now before I could tell you. And as I said to you, you should have read it, or you should have had a thorough knowledge of the story. Now remember, in the exam, they're never going to tell us the story of Romeo and Juliet. They're going to test you on certain, important issues or important themes. And with that, now that I've told you the story, now that you know the story, what we're going to do when we're concentrating on the drama is we're going to look at last year's paper 2, specifically the question on Romeo and Juliet. And when we come back, we'll be looking at the contextual questions, certain contextual questions that you could be asked on a book like this. But remember, through it all, you need to have a rounded, thorough knowledge of the book, a rounded, thorough knowledge of the book in order for you to answer any of the questions based on Romeo and Juliet. So when we return, we're going to stop for a short ad break. And when we return, I'm going to be showing you typical questions that you could be asked on Romeo and Juliet in your final exam. And with that, we're off to an ad break. See you shortly. And welcome back. With all of the knowledge that I've given you on the gist of the play, with the knowledge that you've got, I suppose these questions should be an absolute breeze. Remember, I mentioned this earlier before the ad break, you need to have a rounded knowledge. You need to have a thorough understanding of the book. That way, any question that is posed on the text, any question that's posed on the drama, you will be able to answer. That's only if your knowledge of the book, knowledge of the drama, is thorough. And that will only come from reading, retelling to your friends, watching the movie, but obviously never ever watch the movie before you've actually read the text. Okay, now you've got the knowledge. What do you do with it? Let's look at questions that you could be asked on this drama. These questions are adapted from the November 2011 paper, 2011 paper, English paper 2. All right, and it's the drama section. The instruction reads as follows. Read the following extracts from the play and answer the set questions. The number of marks allocated to each question serves as a guide to the expected length of your answer. At this point, you should know exactly what that means. If it's a 2-mark question, you need to provide an answer that will be able to score you 2 marks. If it's a 3-mark question, the same. Provide an answer that will be able to score you those 3 marks. Let's look at the extract chosen. Now, when you read the extract, in your mind, again, based on the knowledge, on your thorough knowledge of the text, when you read the extract provided in the exam, you should be able to contextualize this extract, meaning figure out exactly which part of the play this extract comes from. The nurse visits Friar Lawrence's cell after Romeo's banishment. Oh, holy friar, oh, tell me, holy friar, where is my lady's lord? Where is Romeo? There, on the ground, with his own tears made drunk. Oh, he is even in my mistress' case, just in her case. Oh, woeful sympathy, piteous predicament. Even so lies she, blubbering and weeping, weeping and blubbering. Stand up, stand up, stand and you be a man. For Juliet's sake, for her sake, rise and stand. Why should you fall into so deep an oh? Okay, so at this point you should figure out where in the play this is taken from. It's the part where Romeo has just killed Tybalt and he has now run away to Friar Lawrence to seek some comfort and to hide, obviously, from the prince. And at this point, Juliet has sent the nurse to call Romeo to her. Nurse, ah, sir, death's the end of all. Speakest thou of Juliet? How is it with her? Doth not she think me an old murderer? Now I have stained the childhood of our joy, with blood removed but little from her own. Where is she? And how doth she? And what says my concealed lady to our cancelled love? What is the cancelled love? Cancelled love, he probably thinks that the love that they had is no more because of his actions, because he's killed Tybalt. Oh, she says nothing, sir, but weeps, and now falls on her bed, and then starts up, and Tybalt calls, and then Romeo cries, and then falls, and then down falls again. Look at those words. And Tybalt calls, and Romeo cries. So she is grief-struck. She is feeling, she's feeling the death. She's feeling the sadness of the death of Tybalt. She is. But she's also equally feeling the sadness of the fact that Romeo, somebody that she loves, has killed Tybalt. All right, let's look at those questions. Question 1.1. Complete the following sentence by filling in the missing words. Easy question. Write down only the question number and the words. I mentioned easy question only if you have a thorough knowledge of the book, right? Juliet sends the nurse to Friar Lawrence's cell to take Romeo and tell him to come to her that night and say, what does she give to the nurse to prove to Romeo that it is actually her that has sent the nurse? She gives the nurse a ring, all right, as proof that she is coming from Juliet. Remember, this is important because Romeo is now afraid. He's hiding. He's literally hiding in Friar Lawrence's cell because if he is found out, he's going to be put to death. So Juliet needed to send something with the nurse so that he would be sure that the nurse actually is coming from Juliet and it's not a trap to kind of get him out. And what does she want him to come that evening? Why does she want him to come that evening to her? So that he can say goodbye to her. So she's already heard that he's been banished. Or he can say farewell. Or he can say farewell to her. All right? Juliet sends the nurse to Romeo. What does this show the audience about the relationship between the nurse and Juliet? Again, drawing on your knowledge of the text as a whole. What does it tell you? The fact that she is now trusting the nurse and sending her to Romeo, who is hiding from the rest of Verona. It shows that Juliet trusts the nurse. But this is not the only incident that shows us that Juliet trusts the nurse, isn't that so? When it comes to the actual marriage, Juliet trusts the nurse enough to send her to find out about the arrangements from Romeo. She trusts the nurse. We can also say that they are very close. You can two mark question, so at least 2 points. You need to say that the nurse is like a mother figure. is like a mother figure to Juliet. So you could have said any of those two for those 2 marks. Also, the fact that Juliet is prepared to reveal her deepest secrets, for instance, the marriage, her now sending the nurse to Romeo, all of these things that she can't, this kind of information that she can't entrust to anyone else. So the fact that she's willing to entrust her deepest secrets to the nurse also contributes to the fact that we've said that they are very, very close. Quote from the text. The minute you see the word quote, you must know that you need to have it in inverted commas. Quote no more than 2 lines from the extract which show that Romeo and Juliet are equally upset. No more than 2 lines. You could have said, oh, he is even in my mistress' case, he's behaving just like her, just in her case. Even so lies she, blubbering and weeping, weeping and blubbering. Any one of those two would be acceptable. All right, let's go to the next question. Refer to line 3. With his own tears made drunk, briefly explain why Romeo is crying. Again, referring to your knowledge of the text as a whole. Why is he crying? What has he done that is causing him to be in this state? He has murdered Tybalt. All right? He's murdered Tybalt, and he has been banished from Verona. But banished from Verona, why is that breaking his heart? Because he will never see Juliet again. Also, if you said that he realizes that he is now a murderer, those could be any 2 of these reasons could be why he would get you the 2 marks that's expected in this question. Okay, refer to line 7. Blubbering and weeping, weeping and blubbering. How do the events that cause Juliet's blubbering and weeping affect her personal life? Number 1, Tybalt is her cousin, and he has been murdered. So she's upset. She's struck with grief, all right? But Tybalt has been murdered by Romeo. You need to write this out in full sentences, please. Tybalt has been murdered by Romeo, who is now her husband. And because of this, well, not because he's her husband, because he's murdered Tybalt, he has been banished. And because he's been banished, she will not see him again. So basically, what are they asking you? How have these events affected her life personally? Talk about Tybalt because Tybalt is her cousin. It affects her personally. The fact that he's been murdered, she's grief-struck. Talk about Romeo being her husband. The fact that he is the murderer. She will not be able to see him anymore because he's been banished. That too affects her life personally. Refer to line 8. Question 1.6, refer to line 8. Stand up. Stand up. Stand and you be a man. This is now the nurse. This is now the nurse speaking to Romeo. What would Romeo's posture, that is his bodily position, on the stage be at this moment in the play? Remember, he's upset, he's scared, he's distraught, he's filled with regret. So at this point in the play, how do you think he's standing up and he's crying? Do you think that's what basically the examiner is asking you? Based on everything that's happening at this moment, his feelings, everything that's happening right now, what do you think his bodily posture would be? You can say he's probably lying on the floor. You can say he's lying on the floor. You can say that he's sitting. If a person is in a situation like this, I don't think he's going to be sitting like this. You could say he's sitting, probably his head is in his hands. Or you could say that he is prostrate. Any position that comes to mind when someone is in a dilemma, or when someone is upset, or when someone is crying, you could write that down, because that's possibly how he would have been sitting and would have been acceptable. It's 1 mark though. Soon after this scene in the play, Friar Lawrence reminds Romeo that he has many reasons to be grateful. Do you believe that? Do you believe that he's got many reasons to be grateful? In your mind, considering the play as a whole, do you think at this point there is some light for Romeo? He's got reasons to be grateful. Let's look at that. Give 3 reasons, 3 marks, 3 reasons why Romeo should be grateful. Number 1, he's alive. He's had this feud, this fight with Tybalt. And he is alive. That's possibly the first one. Secondly, Juliet is his wife. And she still loves him. Go back to the decree. Remember, if anybody was disturbing the peace of Verona, again, they would pay with their lives. He's not paying with his life. If he's caught or if he's found in Verona, he'll pay with his life. But the prince has merely banished him. He is banished, not put to death. So those are the reasons why Friar Lawrence believes that Romeo is actually, well, he's got many reasons to be grateful. Next question. Refer to the words cancelled love. Something that is cancelled, something that is no more. Is their love cancelled? For Juliet, no, because she sends the ring and she feels that Romeo is her husband. She should be loyal to him. And she loves him. Above all, she loves him. Are these words a prediction? What's a prediction? To be able to say what's going to happen in the future, right? A prediction of the future of Romeo and Juliet's relationship. Give a reason for your answer. Are these words a prediction? Absolutely. Why? They both die at the end. Therefore, the love is cancelled. So in the exam, if they ask you if you believe that these words are a prediction to what's going to happen to their love at the end, it is. It is, because this love doesn't flourish. They don't move on and have children and live happily ever after. Their love is cancelled. So this word is actually, these words, cancelled love, is actually a prediction of what will happen later on in the play or in their lives. And with that, we've come to the end of the contextual questions. But I want to remind you of something. Notice how smoothly these answers flowed, or you were able to formulate these answers because of your thorough knowledge of the book. And this is probably the 3rd or the 4th time that I'm telling you this. A thorough knowledge of the text, a thorough knowledge of the book will allow you to answer any question based on the text. So the good advice here is to make sure that you've read, reread, discussed as many times as you possibly can. And with that, these are typical questions that you could be asked in the exam. When we return after this ad break, we will be looking at a possible essay question that you can be asked on Romeo and Juliet. This essay question has been adapted, has been taken from the last year's 2011, the last year's final paper, 2011 English paper 2. And I'll see you after the break. Welcome back from the ad break. Today we're looking at Romeo and Juliet, the drama section of your English paper 2. We have completed a synopsis of the play, we've done the contextual questions, and now we're going to be looking at a possible essay question on Romeo and Juliet. This question has been adapted from the November 2011 paper 2. In this play, Juliet develops from an innocent young girl into a young woman who also has to deal with complicated relationships. Now this is what I'm doing, underlining keywords in the topic is what you should aim to do when you are attempting the essay question. And make huge sacrifices. These are the keywords. Write an essay in which you discuss Juliet's character. Very important. So this essay is going to be concentrated on Juliet's character. In your essay, here's the hints. you may want to consider the following ideas, among others. How Juliet matures during the course of the play. That is, how does she change? How does her ideas and her opinions move from someone who's young and naive to someone who is more mature and basically making more responsible decisions? How her relationships become more complicated. Relationships with Romeo, relationships with the nurse, her relationship with her mom and her dad, Lord and Lady Capulet, how do those change? How do they become more complicated? The sacrifices, very important. The sacrifices that Juliet makes in her search for happiness. Let's look at that. Let's look at how she matures. Remember, no headings in an essay. Right. This is basically to help you to plan. In your planning, you can have as many headings as you wish to have, but remember, in your essay, no headings. All right. At the beginning of the play, she is young. Why am I saying that? She's 14. Do you remember that Capulet said to Paris that she's 13 going on to 14 and she's still very young. So that is the reason why he's not very eager to marry her off. So she's very young, all right? And she's very obedient. Why am I saying this? She's obedient and she's willing to listen to her mother. Why? Why am I saying this? Do you remember when Paris comes back, he speaks to Lady Capulet about the proposal from Paris, and Juliet doesn't openly defy them and say, well, you know, I'm not prepared to get married, I'm not ready to. She says, I will look, and if looking is to like, then you know, she's willing to have a look at Paris and to consider it. So that is why I'm saying to you that she's obedient. At the beginning of the play, when she meets Romeo, she's hardly shy. Why am I saying that she's hardly shy? Because she allows him to kiss her. When she says, let lips do what hands do, all right? She's hardly shy and she allows him to kiss her. And she allows him to kiss her, all right? She falls passionately. She falls passionately in love. But through all this, there is some change. After all of this happens, it's almost as if she goes through a major mental change. Because when she realizes that he's a Montague, the first thing that goes through her mind is that this love is not going to be possible. She realizes the danger of this love. She realizes that this kind of love cannot work because of who they are, because of the families that they come from. That shows some level of maturity. She warns him. She also says, she talks about if she can't be with him, if she cannot be with him, then if she can't be with Romeo, then the grave will be her marriage bed, all right? So that's, for me, quite mature, sophisticated thought, will be her marriage bed. When she sees him, she warns him. When she sees him in the garden, she warns him of the danger of being there, considering who he is. How else does she mature? She has, despite the fact that she's only 13 going into 14, she seems to have some sort of wisdom of true love. She seems to have some sort of idea of what true love should be. All right? She also matures in a way that in her innocence and obedience to her parents, as the play progresses, she shows a devious side where she deliberately misleads them into thinking that she is going to marry Paris. All right? She shows a devious side when she misleads them. But remember, she only misleads them, and she only comes to this, resorts to this devious behavior because she can't reason with her father. we're not justifying what she's done, but I'm showing you why her character has moved in that direction. From innocent and sweet and obedient, she's moved to devious and misleading her parents because she's unable to reason with her father. It also shows you she's very conscious of the fact that she's married and the repercussions, the religious repercussions of being married and then taking another husband. So that shows you some wisdom and maturity. Okay, and then she remains loyal through all the pain and the grief and the confusion and the pressure from her parents. She doesn't allow herself to falter. She doesn't sacrifice the love she has for Romeo. She remains loyal to him. This shows you that she has matured. She's moved from this young girl to this mature woman who remains loyal to her husband despite anything adverse that's happening at that time, anything that threatens to destroy this love, anything that threatens this love that she has. So she remains loyal to Romeo. So those are the way that she has matured. Let's look at the way that her relationships become complicated. But first, okay, let's just do that. Relationships. It's her relationship with Romeo. Okay. It's moved from love to loyalty to giving up her life if she can't be with him. She is the ultimate wife. She remains loyal and she is true to their love, right to the very end. Let's look at her parents. Very important. How does the relationship between her and her parents change? At the beginning, and I'm reminding you of this, Capulet says to Paris, she's young, she must make up her own mind, she's far too young to be married. And only if she loves you, then and then only will I give my consent. Thereafter, when he's pushing her to marry Paris, he is so quick to disown her. He's so quick to say to her that he will leave her as a wretch. If he sees her begging on the street, he would ignore her. So that type of relationship, that love that he has for her is something that's called conditional love. Lady Capulet even, Lord Capulet has got conditional love for her. He's not consistent in his thinking with her. At one stage, she's too young to be married, she must make up her own mind. Later on, he's forcing her to be married, and if she dares disobey him, he is infuriated by the disobedience to a point where he even threatens to disown her. All right? So he has for her conditional love, and so does Lady Capulet. Why? As a mother, we need to say this. She should have stepped in. She should have sympathized with her child. She should have tried to speak to Juliet to find out what was going on with her, but she refuses to intervene. She refuses to come to Juliet's aid. She refuses to help her. Instead, she goes along with her husband. So she too has conditional love for Juliet, because at the beginning, she offers that Juliet should look at Paris, should consider Paris at the party. Now they are both on the same boat, where they are both pushing her and they are both extremely angry at her for refusing. Look at her relationship with remember to say that it's conditional love. What is conditional love? I love you on condition you do as I say, as opposed to the love that Lord Montague and Lady Montague have for Romeo. Consider their concern for him at the beginning of the play. You need not mention that here, because here you're only concentrating on Juliet. But I just want to draw your attention to what is conditional and what is unconditional love. Look at her relationship with the nurse. Juliet and the nurse have a very close relationship. She trusts the nurse. She trusts the nurse, and the nurse is like a mother figure to her. Those are things that we've mentioned in the contextual question as well. However, this changes. Initially, she trusts her to a point of getting the information about the marriage and taking the ring to Romeo, and through all that time, the trust is still there. But this relationship changes when the nurse advises her, gives her conflicting advice, tells her, you know what, now that Romeo has been banished, maybe Paris is a good idea. And with that, there's a break in that relationship. She realizes that she can't trust the nurse anymore. She can't rely on the nurse anymore. So that relationship is also, it's broken in a way. right? It's compromised by the nurse giving her this type of conflicting advice. So you need to build a little bit on that, the conflicting advice, and the fact that eventually she's alone. She has a relationship with just herself because she can't trust her parents and she can't trust the nurse anymore. And lastly, what does she sacrifice, guys? What does she give up? She sacrifices these relationships. She sacrifices her relationship with the nurse, all right, and she sacrifices her relationship with her parents because they are threatening to disown her because she is disobeying them. So these are the things that she sacrifices, and eventually she sacrifices her life. Most important, she sacrifices her life in order to be with Romeo, in order for this love she has for him. Also consider how brave, how much of courage would a person need to have to take a poison of that type that Friar Lawrence was giving to her. So at the end, her relationships with the nurse and her parents are sacrificed, but ultimately she sacrifices herself. She sacrifices her love, her life for this relationship or for this love that she has for Romeo. And those are the sacrifices that she needs to make. Right? Be wary of the number of words that you are allowed to use. Be wary of how much you elaborate. Do not go off on a tangent. Try and stay as focused as possible. If you feel you're moving off on a tangent, go back to the question. Reassess the question. Make sure the essence of the question, the actual requirements of the question are in your mind. All right, with that, we've come to the end. Well, our time is up, actually, and we've come to the end of Romeo and Juliet. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you everything of the very best. Paper 2 is an exciting paper. It gives you a chance. It gives you a chance to shine. It gives you a chance to show what you've learned from this book. So use that opportunity. And I'd like to say have fun writing the paper, but that will probably only come after you've written the paper and you realize that with your thorough knowledge of the book, you've managed to ace this paper. So grade 12s, good luck for your paper 2. Good luck for your exam overall. And I wish you everything of the very best. Goodbye.